Good morning and welcome to News Studios. I'm Madison Trevor. It is 10 a.m. This year it is 90 years since us British women were granted the right to vote. So today we will be investigating the question, why did it take women so long to get the vote? The first thing we are going to talk about is the methods women used to gain the vote. There were two groups in this time for women to join. There were the suffragists. They were peaceful. For example, they reasoned with arguments, they had meetings, they issued leaflets and collected petitions. They met with politicians to argue their case. In elections, they supported candidates who were in favour of female suffrage. They trained women to speak at public meetings. In the 1906 elections, they put forward male candidates to compete with the liberal politicians who were opposed to female suffrage. They used propaganda, newspapers, napkins, posters, and they had their own newspaper for advertisements on to vote for women. I decided to reenact the suffragists, and this is what I thought it would look like.
What do we want? Vote! When do we want it? Now!
The second group was the WSPU. This was started by Emmeline Pankhurst. They were violent and did illegal things that often ended up with them in prison. Although the number of pro-suffrage MPs in the House of Commons grew, the suffragists got nowhere. In 1903, therefore, Emmeline Pankhurst formed the Women's Social and Political Union. The suffragettes, as they came to be called, were much more militant. They held mass meetings, sent deputation to 10 Downing Street, interrupted from the Ladies' Gallery during the debates in House of Commons, and eventually burned, bombed and smashed to try and get the vote. They burnt down churches, as the Church of England was against what they wanted. They vandalised Oxford Street, apparently breaking all the windows in this famous street. They chained themselves to Buckingham Palace as the royal family was seen to be against women having the vote. They hired out boats and sailed down the River Thames, shouting abuse through loud hailers at Parliament as it sat. Others refused to pay their taxes. Politicians were attacked as they went to work. Their homes were firebombed. Golf courses were vandalised. The first decade of Britain in the 20th century was proving to be violent in the extreme. In these next few pictures, this is my interpretation of what the things may have been like if I were in them. In this picture you can see the protesters started quite young. It is possible that the suffragettes would have become more violent. In February 1913, they blew up part of David Lloyd George's house. He was probably Britain's most famous politician at this time, and he was thought to be a supporter of the right for women to have the vote. Next I'm going to tell you about the obstacles the suffragettes faced. The first obstacle was some MPs opposed to conciliation bills because they did not want any women to get the vote. Some pro-suffrage MPs opposed the bills because they were too narrow. Many Liberals opposed the bills because they thought the 1 million rich women who would get the vote would vote Conservative. The next obstacle the suffragettes faced was that Parliament were put off by the suffragettes feeling seemingly violent and anti-national actions. For example, throwing themselves under horses, damaging and piercing art paintings, what they called non-violent forms of terrorism, as they did not actually kill anybody. They simply were giving more reasons to the public to think that women were unstable and were irresponsible of having the ability to vote. Parliament believed they could not be trusted. Another obstacle that the suffragettes faced was that this view was supported by Queen Victoria. She hardly did anything to advance the cause of women. In 1870, Queen Victoria had written, "Let women be what God intended, a helpmate for man, but with totally different duties and vocations." This is saying that women should be home looking after their houses and family. The final obstacle that the suffragettes faced was that the problem with Parliament was that they were all men, and they were very sexist, and they believed that because the suffragettes were so violent in their campaign, they may be extremely rude if they got the vote. Annie Kenney was the only working-class woman in the senior hierarchy of the Women's Social and Political Union. She was imprisoned 13 times. She and Christabel Pankhurst were the first women to shout at senior politicians for the right to vote. In 1905, Christabel Pankhurst was sent to prison for spitting and hitting a policeman at a Liberal meeting. In June 1913, Derby, when Emily Wilding Davison threw herself under the King's horse Anmer as it rounded Tattenham Corner, she was killed, and however, her actions probably did more harm than good to the cause, as she was a highly educated woman. Many men asked the simple question, if this is what an educated woman does, what might a lesser educated woman do? How can they possibly be given the right to vote? In Parliament, pressure for change was led by Liberal MPs, who were the leading figures in Suffragette Committee, but away from the reasoned debate of Westminster, prisons were filled with women prepared to go to jail for the right to vote. The civil disobedience continued behind bars, with many women force-fed to prevent them hunger striking. While the authorities tried to present them as insane, their families campaigned for the inmates to be given political status, including the right to wear their own clothes, study and prepare their own food. Next, I'm going to tell you about the war efforts. World War I proved to be the turning point for the campaign. The suffragettes effectively put on hold their campaign of the civil direct actions in the interest of national unity. As men went to the Western Front, women proved how indispensable they were in the fields and in the factories. By 1918, no government could resist, and the representation of the People's Act allowed women over 30 the right to vote. It would take a further 10 years to abolish the age qualification and put men and women on an equal footing. A change in attitude towards women made it easier for them to get the vote. With World War I, with so many men in the forces and thousands dying, women were required to do things that normally were previously done by men, such as factory work, police, ambulance, driving, farming, and this helped their argument for getting the vote. New Zealand, Australia, and many other countries had already given women the right to vote, so there was pressure on Britain to give the vote to the women. That's it from me this morning. It's 10:30 a.m. You're watching New Studios. I'm Madison Trevor. Thank you for watching and good night. Up next, it's I'm a Suffragette in prison. Get me out of here.